Welcome to Crafty Sourcer. If you're looking for a raw, unfiltered podcast on all things sourcing in APAC, you've come to the right place. Grab a coffee or wine and join your host and other guests as we dive deep into the complex and ever-evolving world of sourcing, keeping you informed on insights, tools, and even at times, a healthy sourcing debate or two. Now, here's your host, Denise Pereira from Kaleidosource. Settle in and let's get crafty.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to this week's Crafty Saucer. I'm Steve Prince. I'm guest hosting for Denise. We all know that already. And I'm so glad you're joining us. Thank you so much because today is such a great conversation. We have the amazing Christina Coleman with us. She works to amplify Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders perspectives in corporate Australia. She's currently a talent manager at EY, working with their First Nations program. Chrissy and I have worked together for a while. Love her to pieces. You're going to love this episode. Let's get straight into it. Thanks so much. Chrissy, great to have you here. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
No worries. Now, look, your specialty area or the area in which you have the best and greatest perspective is working in the DE&I space, really amplifying, as we said, those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders voices. So from your perspective, what does First Nations sourcing or engaging with First Nations candidates, what does that look like from kind of a corporate point of view? What do people have to think about if a company was starting on their journey to really increase their appeal or their amount of First Nations candidates? How would they go about that? What are the factors that go into it? Is it the same as, is all DE&I the same, or is there anything specific people need to think about?
I think, and what a fantastic question, and thank you so much. And everyone joining, I really am so stoked to be here today. I think things for people to really take into consideration when they're looking at sourcing and I guess Indigenous engagement more broadly is understanding your why. Why are you looking at sourcing Indigenous talent? Why are you looking at engaging in the Indigenous community? And does it only crop up around Reconciliation Week or NAIDOC Week, or when you've got, just say, something due, when you need Indigenous participation, kind of much more of a focal point of that tender or whatever it may be? Really look at from that would be my first point, is understanding your why. Why are you looking at engagement? Second thing I would be looking at is understanding how are you going about it? Who is your external facing? How are you, throwing out the hook to, find Indigenous talent? Are you doing it through the same way as you normally do things? Are you looking at changing things? Are you looking at that Indigenous engagement like that from a trust perspective, or is it from a transactional perspective? So, and what I am very aware of is Indigenous professionals have they're very attuned to understanding who's genuine and who's not. So that would be my very, very important point to focus on, is that if someone's not really genuine in their approach, 9 times out of 10, or I'd say probably 10 times out of 10, your Indigenous candidates will get a real sense and a feel for what that engagement looks like. Why may that be? Simply because as Indigenous people, as a general, we are much more high context in the way we engage. So we are based off relationships, and the way we do things is very relation-based. How we do things in a Western context, it's very explicit, it's very run by time, it's outcome focused. So when we start looking at Indigenous engagement, we need to look at how we are going about that process.
So what you're saying is, if you're saying building an Indigenous practice to really raise the profile of that, is that, so I guess based on that, is representation matters, so how are you presenting? But also it's that additional, as you've said, that additional context of why of is this just say, like you said, are we just doing it through NAIDOC and just to pat ourselves on the back? Is this a wrap, tick box, or is it something that's more genuine? And I think it's really interesting because some sections can be very low context and very low touch of just, here's an objective, here's a number, hit the number. We want, 10 people in our diversity pipeline. Whereas, as you've said, if you're dealing with a high context, it's more about, I guess. So is the difference in the different, I guess, okay, so it's really building that trust, and is there a best way to kind of, I'm just thinking about it, and for those of you viewers who are audio only, I am so white I get lost in a snowstorm. So, Christy, if I was doing something like that, what would the advice be for me? Because I want to make sure that, because I'm a big believer in representation matters, but I also want to make sure that people feel comfortable. And these are, I didn't grow up on the missions, I didn't grow up in country, so it's about how can someone who has the right or positive intentions match that with, I guess, positive actions?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of strength in vulnerability. Sharing your vulnerability, with Indigenous candidates as an organisation or as a leader, really showcases your ability to, I guess, think outside of how we do things transactionally. So by building relationships, by being transparent, like being a good person, and I think it ties back to that trust and your intention. So for me, the biggest factor is understanding understanding your cultural maturity level, and if it's not where it potentially could be, or we could do things a lot better. Maybe educate yourself, educate the broader organisation, and say, look, we're going to go on a bit of a learning journey because we want to be better for X, Y, Z reasons. Not just because we're doing this. We want to be a better organisation. We want to be more competitive, more cutting edge, but also we want to be an Indigenous employer of choice. We want to be validated by the Indigenous community or our Indigenous staff members, so they can tell us that we're doing a great job or we're not doing a good job. That's a really good yardstick and a great kind of gauge when you've got that buy-in and that participation from your Indigenous staff. If you're looking to increase your Indigenous staff numbers, like I said, going on that little learning journey to educate yourself and the broader organisation, a lot of times through whatever medium it may be, like things such as this, where people get to amplify what they're doing in their organisation, LinkedIn, broader community or community kind of engagement settings. You have so many different options to showcase what you're doing. And a lot of times, more than not, Indigenous professionals see these organisations doing the hard work outside of the general Reconciliation Action Plan, NAIDOC Week, and all the kind of Indigenous special dates on the Indigenous calendar. So, and they can get a real sense and a check. And so, I think the biggest thing also to add to that is, if you know of an Indigenous organisation, reach out and say, look, we want to raise up the cultural maturity level of our organisation. Can you take us on do you offer these services? Can we go on this journey with you because we want to be better because of X, Y, Z? I think they have some really good starting points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the thing as well, as you've said, it's important to do it authentically and honestly.
Without a doubt.
And for those of you tuning in, Christy and I had a quick comment earlier, and as I said, the last thing you want is someone who's leading, whether it's a First Nations practice or a DE&I initiative to raise First Nations representation, and you don't want the person leading it to look like they've just driven past Garma in their RM Williams boots, and then that's their credibility. It's certainly important to maybe not get it right, but you get much.
Yeah.
You benefit from at least starting the journey.
Of course. And more times often than not, like I was saying earlier, Indigenous professionals can feel and get a sense and an understanding of who's genuine and who's not. So I think going back to your intention and your why. So you can hand on heart say, look, I'm actually doing something really, really great within the organisation. We know we're not where we should be. However, this is what we're doing. These are the proactive steps that we're taking to get here because we want to do this and we want to be a better organisation for it.
Yeah. And as you've said, it's the power of vulnerability.
That's right.
Hey, we don't have, and I think that's so important because there is so much wonderful talent that maybe we're not reaching because I feel like sometimes a DE&I lens is very much copy paste. We just do the same thing to every market and people will want to join us or want to come on board. And there's, to your point, there's that recognition that sections and segments are different and have different expectations, needs, wants, desires, everything else. Okay. And that kind of segues into our next question about, why does it matter to be different, or why being the same doesn't work?
Yeah, it's those questions that you do the same thing, you get the same response, same outcomes every time. If we do things the same way as we've fundamentally always done things, we're not going to be able to change the scope of our reach or engagement. So especially, and that's really important when it comes to Indigenous engagement, simply for the fact of, and I say this quite a lot, we make up 3% of the population. So when we look at breaking that population down, we have a quarter of those too young, too old to work. We have a quarter of those that are already in jobs that probably like their jobs. They're not looking at, going elsewhere. We've got a quarter of those that maybe, small businesses, they're doing their own thing. So between different organisations such as Corporate Australia, government, mining, professional services, every which organisation we're talking about, we are all picking from a small pool of candidates. And where, I guess, as a generalisation, we're doing the same kinds of things like reconciliation action plans. Not that they don't work, but some of them look the same. They're just a rinse and repeat cycle. They can be a little bit generic. So if you do those same kinds of things, we're going to get the same outcomes. So we need to be, or not just but as a general, we need to be able to get buy-in and understand the community and the cultural trends of how Indigenous people are looking to what's going to fill their bucket when looking for their next organisation. It's not always, with Indigenous people, it's not always just a bigger REM. Some of them are looking for that flexibility. Some are looking for opportunities to be able to give back to community. And more times than not, Indigenous professionals that I speak to, they're in an organisation because of what the organisation can give back to community. So building up Indigenous communities is definitely fundamental to who we are and what we want to achieve as Indigenous people. So I think looking at what are some of your, I guess, perks of the business, like how are you doing things differently for Indigenous candidates, and what does that look like? What sets you apart from your competitor? Speaking about competitors, what I would really love to see across Australia is there's a lot of competition and not so much collaboration when it comes to the Indigenous space. When we look at organisations doing the same thing, but they're still having the same issues, why not collaborate? Collaborate rather than kind of dividing and trying to conquer because you're still fishing from the same pool of applicants. Collaborate, look at what your EVP is for, I guess, as a collective for an organisation, and how can you both work together to support a group of applicants, who you're looking at, maybe engineering, could be somewhere else. Look at how you can target them as a collective organisation, as competitors, but coming together, because a lot of Indigenous people, our culture comes first as opposed to the organisation we work for. Obviously, the organisation we work for is really important. However, who we are culturally will transcend and trump that organisation a lot more times than it doesn't.
Mhm.
So I think why it matters to be different is because the way we operate as Indigenous people is different. We operate. I know I operate different. Lead to a lot of my colleagues, even like yourself and I. We've gone a bit. You and I have gone on a bit of a learning journey into understanding how each other thinks and operates differently when we work together at a time. So, and I think that diversity of thought brings us even more closer together and a lot more richness to conversations that we can have and things that we can achieve.
Mm. No, absolutely, absolutely. Um, okay, fantastic. So I guess thinking about it, and maybe you've already touched on this a little bit, because my next question was going to be how companies can adjust their approach. But it feels like you've made a great point there about if you have 4 or 5 companies in the industry, rather than choosing from A to B to C to D, how do we really amplify and open up the industry?
Absolutely. I think that's really important is to be able to open up the industry and look at that collective approach and how we do things. Because as Indigenous people, fundamentally, that's what we did. We worked together as wasn't a hierarchical structure. It was more of that collective. We have our elders that give us, the guidance and the understanding. But how we do things as an Indigenous people is for the benefit of everyone. Up in the Torres Strait, we've got one boat for if one family has a boat to go fishing and the other family across the way doesn't have a boat, you bet that they're going to be all sharing that boat because they're all going to be fishing. They're all going to be, looking for, kai kai to take home to their families because that boat is going to benefit everyone. If we've got one bike down on the community and uncle needs to get to work, you better believe that uncle's going to be taking old mate who lives next door to him because they work at the same organisation and they're both going to be doubling each other to get to that organisation rather than just that very single-mindedly way of doing things. So I think adjusting the approach to understand that as a collective, Indigenous people have different priorities.
Mhm.
So as organisations looking to attract talent, adjust your priorities as well.
Okay, okay, fantastic. So Chrissy, when we do sourcing, as you know, we're often talking about maybe the EVP or in a different lens, maybe the why of coming to the company or what's attractive about the company. So if we're looking to engage with First Nations candidates and really make it meaningful, how do we do that? Is there any kind of considerations more specific we can, because I mean, there are ways to go, hey, I just want to look at First Nations candidates, what have you, but it's one thing to find them. It's a different thing to engage with people and as you've said, do it authentically, do it real. So
Yeah, for
I guess what would you advise people if they're looking to maybe engage or really increase their footprint in the First Nations area? How do you think they should do that?
Ooh, so that's a big question. I think that's a question that I guess a lot of industries, a lot of organizations still struggle with because no one does it right.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the biggest factor for Indigenous people is, or sorry, not Indigenous people, but for organizations, we're all great. Everyone's great at running big campaigns and putting money into the attraction part of things and come join us, we've got this perk, this perk, this perk, this looks great, and it's all shiny and like all the confetti's flowing around and it looks great. I think where the slow burn is the retention piece. So
Mhm.
when all of that confetti falls to the ground and when the shiny bits wear off, how are your Indigenous people being heard within the organization, not a once off, not just as a, check in, not just as a temperature check through surveys, but how are you having conversations to get a sense and a feel what's important for them? Because what was important for, Martha in January, her priorities may have changed by September. And if she's not supported, I guess, as a professional, but then also more broadly, the family structure of what Master's bringing to the organisation, Martha may be looking at other opportunities if she doesn't feel supported or if her work arrangements aren't suiting her anymore. Is she off country? Did she go off country to come to this job? Is she looking to get more engagement? Does she need to feel more engaged? So I think it goes back to that high context way of, engaging, that relationship based. What are you doing as a leader, as an organization, or as a team to look at supporting your Indigenous staff member? This goes both ways for Indigenous staff. Our culture sits just here on our shoulders.
Mhm.
I am more than willing to share everything about being an Indigenous woman, my lived experience, my cultural heritage, and what I know, the challenging parts of it, but then also the fun parts. And I'm willing to share that with non-Indigenous Australia. I need an invitation to have that share, for me to share that. I need an invitation. I need to know that I have a safe space within an organization or within a team or within with my leader or my colleagues where I can open up and be myself. So then it also comes back to that high context way of communicating. Does someone feel genuinely a sense of belonging? Do they feel like they can be Martha, the Indigenous woman, the community elder that she is? Or does Martha work in two worlds? Does she have to put on a non-Indigenous voice? Does she have to put a non-Indigenous laugh on? Or can Martha just have her unapologetic, loud laugh and share every component of her culture and her community and her upbringing to bring a richness and a diversity of thought to that team? So I think making it meaningful for, Auntie Martha over here, how does Auntie Martha feel valued? And it's not what you say. You as an organization don't get to validate your own self and pat yourself on your own back and say, oh, we've done this for Martha, we've done this for Martha, because where are you enabling her self-determination and participation of decision making? Martha needs to be able to say, that organization is doing amazing because Martha said so, not because the organization said so.
Yep. Okay. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Chrissy, we're almost at time, but just lastly, and this one is a bit of a curveball question, but I'll make it super easy.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Are there any particular resources or any particular, because I'm just thinking of the way that you've engaged with sourcing, for example, as building a talent attraction practice. Are there any particular resources that you've discovered, or if people were looking to kind of emulate your journey, is there anything they should particularly do? Obviously, you mentioned before about reaching out to Aboriginal councils or local businesses or what have you, but is there anything else you can think of, or any particular reading or viewing or any resources to really help enrich their decision making?
Yeah, of course. I think the IATSIS website is a really good starting point. So IATSIS, I think it's iatsis.com.gov.au. It's a government website, but there's a lot of Indigenous content in there with links to further stuff. Looking at the Closing the Gap initiatives, the Productivity Commission is a really good understanding to understand, I guess, some of those socioeconomic and some of the gaps that we have within the Indigenous community. I like to celebrate the positives for us as a culture and how far we've come thus far. However, we do have so many barriers within the fabric of the nation, and the Productivity Commission really kind of looks at that and what that looks like. So I know that the latest update from the Productivity Commission was just came out a few days ago. So get on the website, have a look at some of the gaps, the Closing the Gap targets, what's on target, what's not on target, what's gone backwards, and see if you can, as an organisation, form some of your approaches by looking at some of that stuff.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And while we've been speaking, Chrissy, I've just double checked that website, and that's iatsis.gov.au. So it's aiatsis.gov.au. Chrissy, thank you so very much. It's been so lovely chatting with you.
It's my pleasure.
it is always such a wonderful time when we get a chance to talk. But look, thank you so much. I'll thank you. I can just say thank you again and again. But look, I'm going to jump and let everyone else get back to their day. But thank you so much. And everyone listening, stay crafty.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. And we'll be back next week with another exciting episode. If you found this valuable, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, happy sourcing and stay crafty. Until next time.